The new Dodge Charger Daytona EV, and it's, well, let's just say controversial. This hasn't been particularly well received by the public, and it hasn't been very well reviewed either.
There was a time when muscle cars ruled the streets. Roaring engines, bold stripes, and enough torque to rattle your chest. But not every muscle car that rolled off the assembly line lived up to the legend. Some looked fierce, but had the heart of a family sedan. Others tried to adapt to the times, only to lose everything that made them special. From gas crises to government regulations and bad corporate decisions, the muscle car era saw more than a few tragic misfires. These were the machines that carried great names, but delivered little excitement, disappointing fans who expected thunder and got a whimper instead. Today, we're taking a look back at 13 muscle cars that were supposed to be road warriors, but ended up being total disappointments. Let's start with one that broke the hearts of Pontiac loyalists everywhere. Number 13, Pontiac GTO, 1974. The Pontiac GTO once defined the muscle car era. Raw power, bold looks, and the kind of street presence that made other cars step aside. But by 1974, that fire had all but burned out. The GTO name was slapped onto the compact Pontiac Ventura, a far cry from the powerful legends of the late 1960s. It was smaller, lighter, and completely stripped of its muscle identity. Gone was the mighty 400 cubic inch V8 that made the GTO famous. Instead, the 1974 version came with a 350 cubic inch engine that managed just 200 horsepower. And even that was optimistic. The design felt generic, the handling uninspired, and the sound of the engine lacked the deep growl fans remembered. To make matters worse, the 1974 oil crisis hit right when muscle car buyers were losing patience with rising prices and falling performance. In short, the GTO's final act was a quiet exit, not the roaring farewell it deserved. Number 12, Ford Mustang II, 1974 to 1978. The Ford Mustang started a revolution in the 1960s, a perfect blend of power, style, and affordability. But when the 1970s hit, the world changed. Gas prices soared, emissions rules tightened, and Ford panicked. Their answer? The Mustang II. It arrived in 1974 with smaller dimensions, tamer engines, and a design philosophy that seemed to forget everything that made the Mustang iconic in the first place. Built on the same platform as the Pinto, the Mustang II was more about fuel economy than fun. Early models didn't even offer a V8, something that would have been unthinkable for the original pony car. Even when the V8 returned, it produced a weak 140 horsepower, barely enough to justify the badge on the grille. The handling felt dull, and the body looked more like a compact commuter car than a symbol of speed. Sure, it sold well at first because of the oil crisis, but for true enthusiasts, it was an embarrassment. The Mustang II may have saved the nameplate financially, but it nearly killed the Mustang's spirit. Number 11, Dodge Charger, 1982. For car enthusiasts, the Dodge Charger name once meant brute strength and pure American muscle. It was the car that ruled drag strips and movie screens alike. But by 1982, the Charger had become something unrecognizable. Chrysler took the legendary name and slapped it onto a compact front-wheel drive hatchback, a move that felt like an insult to everything the Charger once stood for. Instead of the deep rumble of a V8, buyers got a modest four-cylinder engine producing as little as 84 horsepower. Even the performance-oriented models, like the Charger 2.2, barely scraped past 100 horsepower. There was no rear-wheel drive, no thunderous acceleration, and no reason for muscle car fans to care. It handled decently for a small car, but no one wanted a practical Charger. Fans wanted fire-breathing power, not economy car mileage. The 1982 Charger proved that badge engineering without soul only leads to disappointment. It would take decades before Dodge redeemed the name with the roaring V8-powered Chargers of the 2000s. But for the early 80s, the once mighty Charger had fallen to its weakest point ever. Number 10. Chevrolet Camaro Iron Duke, 1982. When Chevrolet unveiled the third-generation Camaro in 1982, fans expected a comeback story, a return to the raw performance that made the name legendary. Instead, what they got was one of the weakest muscle cars ever to wear the Camaro badge. The culprit? The infamous Iron Duke engine. Under the hood sat a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine that produced a pitiful 90 horsepower. That's right, 90 horsepower in a car, built to compete with legends. It took over 20 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour, making it slower than some family sedans of the time. The body looked fast, the styling screamed performance, but once you hit the gas, it was all show and no-go. Chevy offered V6 and V8 options, but the base model Iron Duke Camaro became a symbol of how far muscle cars had fallen. It was built for fuel economy and emissions compliance, not for power or thrill. Enthusiasts felt betrayed. The Camaro that once burned rubber was now barely crawling off the line. Even today, the Iron Duke remains a painful memory in Camaro history, a reminder of when performance took a back seat to practicality. Number 9. AMC Matador Machine, 1971. The early 1970s were the golden age of muscle, and even AMC, a company known for quirky, budget-friendly cars, wanted a piece of the action. The result was the AMC Matador Machine, an ambitious attempt to take on Detroit's heavy hitters. On paper, it sounded promising: aggressive styling, optional V8 power, and a name that hinted at performance. But in reality, it was a swing and a miss. The Matador machine suffered from awkward proportions and confusing marketing. It was never clear if AMC wanted it to be a family car, a luxury cruiser, or a performance beast. Even the optional 401 cubic inch V8 couldn't save it from mediocrity, because the car was heavy and undertuned. Handling was clumsy, acceleration was unimpressive, and fuel economy was dreadful. All fatal flaws during the oil-conscious era. AMC tried to sell the car on its bold looks, but those looks didn't age well. By the mid-1970s, the Matador had become a forgotten oddity in showrooms filled with true muscle machines. The car had heart, but not the muscle or refinement to back it up. It proved that passion without proper execution just isn't enough to win in the performance world. Number 8. Plymouth Volare Roadrunner, 1976. The Roadrunner was once the poster child of no-nonsense American muscle. Light, loud, and fast enough to smoke anything at a stoplight. But by 1976, that legend had been reduced to a shell of its former self. When Plymouth attached the once glorious Roadrunner badge to the Volare, fans were stunned, and not in a good way. Built on Chrysler's F-body platform, the Volare Roadrunner looked soft and uninspired. It ditched the aggressive stance and raw energy that made the original so exciting. Under the hood, buyers could get a slant 6 engine or a 318 cubic inch V8, producing barely 150 horsepower. Even the high-performance 360 V8 couldn't revive the muscle. Emissions controls and weak tuning left it gasping for power. Worse, the Volare itself was plagued with quality control issues. Rust, suspension failures, and poor assembly made it one of Chrysler's most infamous launches. The once feared Roadrunner name had become nothing more than an appearance package with decals and spoilers that promised performance it couldn't deliver. For fans who remembered the glorious late 60s models, this version felt like betrayal. The 1976 Volare Roadrunner proved that nostalgia can't save a legend when the muscle is gone. Number 7. Mercury Cougar, late 1970s. In the late 1960s, the Mercury Cougar stood proudly as the sophisticated cousin to the Ford Mustang. Powerful, stylish, and perfectly balanced between luxury and muscle. But by the late 1970s, that balance had collapsed. The Cougar had drifted far from its roots, trading raw performance for plush interiors, chrome trim, and bloated size. What once roared down the highway now floated like a sofa on wheels. Under the hood, smaller, underpowered engines replaced the growling V8s of the past. Horsepower dropped into the embarrassing double digits, and the Cougar became more about comfort than cornering. It wasn't a muscle car anymore. It was a personal luxury car trying to wear the clothes of its former glory. Ford's decision to chase the luxury market instead of maintaining performance turned the Cougar into something unrecognizable. It shared more DNA with the Thunderbird than with any true muscle machine. Even the sporty XR7 trim couldn't hide the truth. This car was more interested in looking powerful than being powerful. For longtime fans, it was a sad transformation. The Mercury Cougar went from muscle-bound predator to domesticated house cat, and enthusiasts were left wondering where the real Cougar had gone. Number 6. Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS, mid-1980s. When Chevrolet revived the Monte Carlo SS in the mid-1980s, it looked like a dream come true for muscle car fans. The aerodynamic body lines, rear spoiler, and NASCAR-inspired decals promised a return to street dominance. On the surface, it looked fast, but the disappointment started the moment you turned the key. Underneath all that aggressive styling was a small block 305 cubic inch V8, producing just 180 horsepower. That might have been acceptable for a family sedan, but not for a car wearing the SS badge. Despite being mated to a 4-speed automatic, it struggled to deliver any serious thrill. The car's weight and lack of torque made it feel sluggish, especially compared to the legends it was trying to emulate. The handling was better than expected, thanks to a tighter suspension and rear-wheel drive. But the Monte Carlo SS still couldn't back up its race-inspired looks. It was all bark and little bite. To make things worse, the interior felt cheap, filled with plastic panels and loose fittings that undermined its performance image. It was a car that looked like a hero on posters, but felt like a pretender behind the wheel. The Monte Carlo SS of the 1980s reminded fans that style without substance can only carry a car so far, and no amount of stickers could fix that. Number 5. Pontiac Firebird, 1980 to 1981, Turbo Trans Am. The Pontiac Firebird Trans Am was once the ultimate symbol of American muscle. Sleek, loud, and overflowing with attitude. By the time the 1980s rolled in, Pontiac tried to keep that magic alive with a new idea. turbocharging. On paper, it sounded like the perfect way to reclaim lost power in an era strangled by emissions rules. But in execution, the Turbo Trans Am was a disaster. The 301 cubic inch turbocharged V8 promised modern performance, yet it produced only 210 horsepower, barely more than the naturally aspirated engines it replaced. The problem wasn't just power, it was how that power arrived. Turbo lag was enormous, and when the boost finally kicked in, it often came too late to matter. The car felt inconsistent, unpredictable, and far from the sharp performer fans expected. Worse still, reliability was dreadful. The turbo system ran hot, oil leaks were common, and mechanical failures plagued owners. Even the famous Smokey and the Bandit styling couldn't save its reputation. It looked the part, but it simply couldn't perform like a Trans Am should. In the end, the Turbo Trans Am became a symbol of an era when muscle cars tried to reinvent themselves, and failed. The name survived, but the power, soul, and spirit that once defined it were nowhere to be found. Number 4. Dodge Challenger, 1978 to 1983. Few names in muscle car history carry as much weight as the Dodge Challenger. The original 1970 model was a masterpiece. Long hood, wide stance, and brutal V8 power. But when Dodge brought the name back in 1978, it wasn't a rebirth. It was a complete betrayal. The new Challenger wasn't even American in spirit. It was actually a rebadged Mitsubishi Galant Lambda imported from Japan. Instead of a thunderous V8, it came with a weak inline-4 or a modest V6. The most powerful version managed barely 105 horsepower, less than what the original Challenger made at idle. And it wasn't even rear-wheel drive. It was a compact front-engine coupe that shared more in common with an economy car than a muscle legend. Dodge's decision to resurrect such an iconic name for a car so lifeless angered loyal fans. The body was bland, the handling uninspiring, and the engine note uninspired, a far cry from the deep growl of the 426 Hemi days. Even with a few styling tweaks, it couldn't hide the fact that this was a cheap import wearing a legendary badge. The 1978 to 1983 Challenger became one of the most infamous examples of corporate tone deafness in muscle car history. It took until 2008 for Dodge to finally make things right and bring back the real Challenger, with all the muscle it deserved. Number 3. Oldsmobile 442, late 1970s. In the 1960s, the Oldsmobile 442 stood shoulder to shoulder with the GTO, Chevelle SS, and other muscle icons. It was a powerhouse. The 442 stood for a 4-barrel carb, 4-speed manual, and dual exhausts, a recipe for pure American performance. But by the late 1970s, that glorious formula had been watered down beyond recognition. The once feared 442 had become little more than a trim package. Instead of thunderous big block engines, it was powered by small V8s, choked by emissions controls and low compression ratios. The 350 cubic inch engine, which once made well over 300 horsepower, was now reduced to around 160. Even worse, some versions came with the same engines found in family sedans. The exterior still looked sporty, but the performance was long gone. Handling was soft, acceleration was sluggish, and the sound, that deep Oldsmobile growl, had turned into a weak hum. Enthusiasts who once worshipped the 442 name were left disappointed by what it had become, a shell of its former self. By trying to keep the name alive without the performance to back it up, Oldsmobile diluted one of the most respected badges in American muscle history. The late 70s 442 wasn't a bad car, it was just a heartbreaking one. It reminded everyone how the mighty muscle era had fallen to its knees. Number 2. Ford Thunderbird, late 1970s. The Ford Thunderbird began life as a stylish two-seater meant to rival the Corvette, sporty, elegant, and full of personality. Over the years, it grew in size and sophistication, but by the late 1970s, the T-Bird had completely lost its identity. What was once a sleek performance coupe had morphed into a massive, sluggish luxury boat. The 1977 to 1979 models were the peak of this transformation. They looked impressive, with long hoods, hidden headlights, and chrome everywhere. But beneath that flashy exterior was disappointment. Ford dropped in weak V8s producing as little as 130 horsepower to move a car that weighed nearly 2 tons. Acceleration was laughable, handling was clumsy, and fuel economy was abysmal. The Thunderbird, once a symbol of performance and prestige, had become a symbol of excess and compromise. Even the interior, though plush, reflected this confusion. It was comfortable, sure, but far from exciting. The focus was on luxury touches like velour seats and fake wood trim instead of driving dynamics. It was a car built for image, not experience. For enthusiasts who remembered the early Thunderbirds and their graceful power, this oversized cruiser felt like betrayal. The late 70s Thunderbird proved that no amount of chrome or comfort could replace genuine muscle, and it showed how easily a legend could be lost to marketing trends. Number 1. Chevrolet El Camino, 1980s. Few vehicles in American history were as unique as the Chevrolet El Camino. Half car, half truck, and all attitude. Through the 1960s and early 70s, it carved out a cult following, blending muscle car performance with utility. But by the 1980s, that magic had faded. The El Camino had gone from a bold statement of power to a confused relic of a bygone era. The styling was softer, the engines weaker, and the spirit nearly gone. By 1983, the base model came with a 3.8-liter V6, producing just 110 horsepower. Hardly enough to move its bulky frame with confidence. Even the optional 305 V8 couldn't save it, as it barely made 150 horsepower and struggled to deliver real performance. The El Camino still looked the part with its long hood and truck bed, but once behind the wheel, it felt slow, tired, and outdated. Chevrolet tried to market it as a personal pickup, but buyers weren't interested anymore. Muscle car fans saw it as underpowered, while truck buyers found it impractical. The El Camino ended production in 1987 without a true send-off, quietly disappearing after 2 decades of trying to be everything to everyone. The 1980s El Camino wasn't a bad idea. It was just a victim of its time. It proved that style and nostalgia couldn't hide the lack of heart under the hood. Once a symbol of American ingenuity, it ended up being remembered as one of the most disappointing muscle cars to ever wear a bow tie. The story of these 13 muscle cars is more than just a list of mechanical failures. It's a reflection of an entire era's struggle. The oil crises, tightening emissions laws, and corporate shortcuts all conspired to weaken the very essence of American performance. Legends that once ruled the highways were forced to shrink, soften, or fade away completely. But from those low points came valuable lessons. Automakers eventually realized that true muscle isn't just about looks or nostalgia. It's about power, presence, and passion. That's why modern revivals like the Dodge Challenger Hellcat, Chevrolet Camaro SS, and Ford Mustang GT exist today. Every one of these disappointments paved the way for a comeback story. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that real muscle may stall for a while, but it never stays down for long.